The Council's decision. The chamber of the Galactic War Council stretched higher than any cathedral ever built on Earth, its walls lined with living stone that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins, each glow synchronized to the heartbeat of the galaxy's ruling elite. Delegates from 47 worlds sat in rising tiers, their voices like a storm of whispers echoing off the cold walls. And at the center of the floor stood the raised dais of the high chair, where Chancellor Vaith of the Drylith presided. His scaled body gleamed under the chamber's light as he raised one claw to silence the restless assembly. For today's subject was unlike any other. Today they would decide the fate of a world still defiant in the face of their demands. That world was Earth, home of the humans. Reports had arrived in waves over the past months. Ships dispatched to orbit had been met with silence. Transmissions demanding surrender had received nothing but curt acknowledgments. And worse still, no emissary from Earth had bowed before the Council's authority. To many in the chamber, this was an insult beyond measure, for every species inducted into the Galactic Order had recognized the power of the Council, some through diplomacy, most through the swift demonstration of overwhelming force. Yet humans remained unbroken, a young race still climbing into the stars, and somehow they refused to kneel. Chancellor Vaith allowed his eyes to scan the assembly before him, and with a voice deep and commanding, he declared that this arrogance could no longer be tolerated, that humanity's defiance was a contagion which, if left unchecked, would inspire others to resist. The delegates muttered, some agreeing eagerly, some cautious, but none willing to challenge the Chancellor openly. From the Quorum delegation, a thin being of translucent skin rose and questioned whether humanity's silence meant weakness or strength, whether their refusal to plead could hide weapons not yet known. A ripple of unease followed the words, but was quickly drowned by the thunderous voice of General Orkan of the Sith Dominion, who slammed his armored fist against the railing and swore that humans were nothing but prey animals pretending to be predators, fragile bodies that would crumble when faced with true might. His declaration drew cheers from many who had fought wars of conquest before and found victory easy. Still others sat quiet, remembering fragments of reports from scouts who spoke of human endurance, of battles on their own death world where storms and beasts tested them daily, where survival was earned, not given. The debate dragged on for hours, each voice layered with arrogance or doubt, until at last Chancellor Vaith raised both claws and silenced them again. He announced the Council's judgment, a proclamation that would echo across the stars, that humanity would be summoned once more to submit, and if they refused, then the Council would unleash a campaign of terror unlike anything they had endured before. Planets would burn, fleets would blot out their skies, and the humans would beg for mercy at the feet of their betters. The proclamation was met with a roar of approval, but not all shared the celebration. In the shadows near the edge of the chamber sat Envoy Chiral of the Thren Confederacy, her feathered head tilted slightly as she studied the records glowing in her console. She had seen the patterns others ignored. She had seen how humans adapted, how they never responded with fear but with silence. And in that silence, she felt something dangerous, something even the mighty Council might not be ready to face. Still, the decision was sealed. The Galactic War Council had spoken. Their arrogance carried on every channel, their order dispatched across the fleets. The message was simple and final. Humanity would kneel or it would be broken. Yet as the envoys departed and the chamber lights dimmed, a quiet tension hung in the air, for some could not shake the thought that perhaps this time the Council had made a mistake. Perhaps in their hunger to display power, they had stirred a force that would not beg, a force that would rise. Humanity's response. The Council's message spread like wildfire through the galactic networks, its voice of supremacy amplified across star systems as a warning to all who might resist. And yet on Earth, the transmission played before leaders, scientists, soldiers, and civilians, with an eerie calm, no shouting, no pleading, no panic filled the room where the United Earth Assembly had gathered. Instead, there was silence, the kind of silence born not of fear, but of calculation. The alien Chancellor's words echoed in translation, promising fleets of fire and devastation, demanding unconditional surrender, insisting humanity would beg for its survival. When the transmission ended, the great hall remained still. Only the sound of distant ventilation and the soft creak of chairs as leaders shifted in their seats broke the quiet. At the center of the chamber stood Ambassador Elias Trent, a man who had once been dismissed as too young, too direct, but who had proven himself in countless negotiations with rival human powers before the stars had even opened. His dark eyes studied the council's recorded image a moment longer before he turned to his fellow representatives, his voice steady and controlled as he spoke. He said that the council had made one critical mistake. They believed humanity did not answer because it was afraid. They thought silence meant weakness. But what they could not comprehend was that silence was a choice. Humanity had listened, measured, and now it was time to speak. Around the room, the faces of generals and scientists exchanged glances. General Han of the Pacific Command leaned forward, his scarred hands gripping the table, and asked whether the ambassador was truly prepared to confront the council with words that might doom them all. Trent's response was not fire or bravado, but calm steel, he said. Humanity had never been given its victories. Every inch of survival on Earth had been fought for, against storms that tore cities apart, against diseases that tried to erase them against one another in wars both ancient and modern, and always humanity endured. He said that the council needed to learn the same lesson every empire in human history had eventually learned, that humans do not kneel easily. So when the council's delegation arrived days later, descending in their gleaming silver vessel to the landing site outside Geneva, they expected to find banners of surrender, broken leaders begging for clemency. Instead, they were welcomed into a hall lined not with desperate faces but with calm, resolved figures. At the head of the table stood Elias Trent, his posture straight, his eyes unyielding. The alien envoy, a towering Dralith bearing the crest of Chancellor Vaith, unrolled a glowing scroll of demands that detailed Earth's surrender, the dismantling of its fleets, the servitude of its people. He spoke in booming tones meant to intimidate, his voice dripping with arrogance as he declared that humanity's only chance of survival was obedience. When the envoy finished, silence filled the hall again, a silence that stretched uncomfortably, long until Trent finally rose to speak. His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of an entire species. He said that humanity had heard the council, that they had listened to its threats, and that they understood the choice before them. Then he leaned forward slightly, his voice cold but steady, and told the envoy that Earth would never beg. He told him that if the council wished for submission, they would find only resistance. If they wished for mercy, they would discover humanity had none left to give. And if they believed that fear could break the will of mankind, they would soon learn that the human spirit was forged in trials far harsher than war. The alien envoy shifted, his crest feathers trembling with unease. For in those words he did not hear defiance born of desperation, but confidence, and confidence unsettled him more than rage ever could. He hissed that the council would bring ruin, that humanity would be erased. But even as he spoke, his voice faltered because the eyes staring back at him from across the table were not afraid. Every human present seemed carved from iron. And though their weapons were smaller, their fleets fewer, there was something in their gaze that whispered of storms yet to come. When the envoy departed, returning to his vessel to report failure, the humans did not cheer, they did not cry, they simply began to prepare. In laboratories, scientists doubled their efforts on projects long hidden. In bases, soldiers drilled with renewed purpose. And across the networks, citizens stood taller, no longer wondering if the galaxy's judgment would crush them, but knowing the test was coming and that they would not falter. Elias Trent stood at the window of the assembly hall watching the alien ship ascend into the sky, his reflection cold in the glass, and he whispered to no one in particular that the galaxy had finally made its choice. Now it was humanity's turn to answer. The first clash. The fleets of the Galactic War Council moved like a living storm across the void, their ships vast and gleaming, their weapons charged with the power of centuries of conquest, and as they emerged from hyperspace above the blue and green sphere of Earth, they expected silence, they expected panic, they expected to watch humans crumble before the weight of their authority. But what they found instead was something entirely different. For orbit was not empty. It was alive with human vessels small by galactic standards, rugged and angular, not elegant like the curved hulls of council ships, but bristling with intent and moving with a purpose that caught the alien commanders off guard. The first warning shot came from the council flag vessel. A blinding beam meant not to destroy but to terrify. It ripped through the darkness and grazed the upper atmosphere, sending waves of fire cascading across the sky as a display of dominance. The message clear that resistance was useless. But before the echo of its destruction faded, the human ships responded not with pleas, but with precision volleys of kinetic rounds fired from rail cannons. Each slug a spear of metal propelled at speeds. No alien ship design had ever accounted for one council cruiser reeled as its shields flared and buckled under the assault. And in that moment, the illusion of effortless superiority cracked. On the ground, people lifted their eyes to the heavens and watched the streaks of fire cross the night sky, some fearful, some awed, but all realizing that humanity had chosen not to bow. They had chosen to fight in orbit. The alien commanders scrambled, recalculating their strategies, for this was not the collapse they had predicted. It was defiance made manifest. The council admiral barked orders to sweep the human fleet aside, calling them insects clinging to stone. Yet every maneuver met with human resistance. The smaller vessels darted and weaved, adapting mid-battle with an unpredictability that confounded their opponents. They used gravity slingshots around the planet itself. They used debris fields as cover. They fought not with order but with chaos, and it worked. A human frigate, designated Iron Resolve, broke through a gap in the enemy formation. Its hull scarred and burning, but its guns still alive. It launched a desperate barrage into the flank of a council destroyer. And against all calculations, the mighty vessel shuddered, its shields torn open, its core rupturing in a burst of fire. The explosion lit the void, and for the first time in living memory, a fleet of the council had taken damage from a species deemed primitive. The shock ran through the alien ranks like a wave of ice. Inside the command bridge of the flagship, Admiral Korith of the Vaith Dominion ground his teeth and demanded explanations. His subordinates stammered about human unpredictability, about strategies that made no sense, about resilience that defied reason, and as he listened, he felt something gnawing in the pit of his stomach. Fear for in the eyes of his kind. Fear was rare, but here it rose unbidden, because humanity was not fighting to win swiftly. They were fighting to endure, to bleed their enemy, and to show the galaxy that they could never be crushed by intimidation. On Earth, the people watched the feeds in silence, their faces lit by the glow of battle, their hearts pounding with dread and pride. Families gathered in crowded rooms, soldiers on leave clenched their fists. Civilians whispered prayers, yet beneath it all there was unity, a sense that this was not only about survival but about proving to the galaxy that humanity would never beg, never kneel, never surrender. Ambassador Elias Trent stood in the command center listening to reports of losses and victories, and though the numbers were grim, his voice when he spoke was steady. He told his people that today was not the day they bent. Today was the day they showed the galaxy what it meant to be human. As the first clash drew to a bloody close, wreckage drifted in orbit. Broken hulls, both human and alien, scattered like bones across the Black Sea. Yet through the smoke and ruin, one truth had emerged. The Council's fleets were not invincible, and the humans were not prey. They were predators, rising, teeth bared and eyes fixed on survival. And for the first time, the galaxy began to wonder what storm had truly been awakened. The turning point news of the battle above Earth did not remain confined to the Council's fleets. It spread across the stars faster than any official report could contain. Its smugglers whispered it in shadowed ports. Merchants carried it with fearful voices across trade routes, and even the neutral stations replayed intercepted transmissions of human ships striking Council destroyers with weapons born from ingenuity rather than elegance. The galaxy had been told for generations that the Council's fleets were untouchable, that resistance was suicide. Yet here was proof that a species considered backward had drawn blood, and though the humans had suffered heavy losses, though many of their ships were reduced to drifting husks, the symbol of defiance was too loud to ignore. In the grand chamber of the Council, the atmosphere was strained. Gone was the easy arrogance that had filled the air when Chancellor Vaith had declared his ultimatum. Now there was a sharp edge to every word, as envoys demanded. Answers: how had primitive humans pierced destroyer shields? How had they adapted tactics mid-battle with such ferocity? How had their smaller ships not broken under the sheer terror of facing the galaxy's oldest war machine? Vaith slammed his clawed hand against the table, silencing the accusations. His voice thundered that it was a fluke, that the humans had fought like desperate cornered animals, that victory had still been secured because Earth's orbit remained scarred with human wreckage. Yet beneath his words some heard strain and others saw the faintest flicker of doubt. Among those silent listeners was Envoy Chiral of the Thran, her feathers ruffled in thought, for she had studied humans more carefully than most her agents, had reported stories of their history of wars that spanned continents, of soldiers who fought not for conquest, but because surrender was unthinkable. She had heard of humans who survived disasters that would have killed other species, and she began to suspect that the Council's greatest error was not in underestimating human technology, but in underestimating their will. On Earth, preparations deepened, the people mourned their dead, yet their grief became fuel. Scientists revealed projects long buried in secrecy. Railgun prototypes tested on distant ranges. Plasma shielding, once dismissed as unstable, rushed into deployment. Orbital stations, once intended for peaceful observation, transformed into bastions of defense. Humanity was changing before the galaxy's eyes, turning desperation into innovation, and every strike of the Council only sharpened their resolve. In hidden corners of the galaxy, smaller species watched with unease. Some had been crushed by the Council's iron hand. Others had bent to survive, but now they saw in humanity a mirror of what they once had been. Before fear broke their spirits, whispers spread that perhaps the humans would not only endure but ignite something larger. Rebellion murmured in the dark, carried on channels the Council could not fully silence. When the Council's fleet struck again, they came with overwhelming force, determined to erase the insult. But this time the humans met them with tactics the galaxy had never seen. They used decoys made from orbital wreckage. They scrambled communications with jury-rigged interference arrays. They turned their very planet into a weapon, launching swarms of armed drones from hidden silos across continents. The sky lit with fire as alien beams clashed with human kinetic fury, and though cities trembled and oceans boiled, the humans refused to collapse. Admiral Korath himself watched from his flagship as another of his cruisers went dark, its engines gutted by a strike that should have been impossible. He demanded to know how, and the answer chilled him. The humans had adapted again mid-battle with technology that should not exist by their timeline, and yet there it was, gnawing at his fleet like teeth against bone. The Admiral clenched his jaw, and for the first time in his long career of effortless victories, he wondered if this war was not the demonstration he had promised, but the awakening of a storm that could consume them all. When the battle ended and the fleets retreated, licking their wounds, the galaxy erupted in speculation. Not only had humans survived again, they had forced the Council to pull back something that had not happened in centuries. And though Earth smoldered and its skies were scarred, humanity stood unbowed from orbit. Elias Trent's voice carried across the channels a broadcast not of surrender, but of promise. He told the galaxy that humanity would not vanish, that the Council had unleashed something it could never chain again, and across worlds far removed, listeners felt a chill, for in his words was not desperation but destiny, the price of underestimation. The Council had believed that overwhelming force would crush the spirit of Earth once and for all, so when their armadas gathered, again they did not come with intimidation. They came with the full wrath of fleets meant to annihilate civilizations. Entire squadrons of battleships spread across the void, their hulls glittering with energy shields, their weapons bristling with the fury of empires that had never known defeat, and as they descended toward the scarred world below, they expected humanity to finally bend. Yet what met them was a resistance so fierce that even the most hardened Council commanders felt the weight of dread in orbit. The human fleets were fewer and smaller, but every ship carried a determination that no alien strategist could quantify. Frigates painted with the names of fallen cities hurled themselves against ships 3 times their size carriers. Once meant for exploration, disgorged squadrons of fighters refitted with scavenged weapons. Drones swarmed in unpredictable waves, guided by human ingenuity rather than centralized control. Every tactic bent the rules of traditional warfare, and Every moment cost the Council dearly. On the ground, Earth itself was aflame with battle. Yet the humans did not falter. Cities turned into fortresses. Tunnels carved deep into stone became staging grounds. Entire communities stood shoulder to shoulder, with soldiers refusing evacuation when asked. Mothers welded armor plates in factories, fathers carried weapons to the defense lines. Children worked to keep supply. Chains alive, every soul became part of the fight because to be human was to resist, and to resist was survival. Admiral Korath stood upon the bridge of his flagship watching the carnage unfold. He had once believed this campaign would be a swift and glorious demonstration of superiority. Now it was a quagmire draining resources and pride at a rate unseen in centuries. He snarled that humans were reckless, that their stubbornness only prolonged the inevitable, yet deep down, he knew that inevitability had shifted for every cruiser lost. Humanity seemed to grow stronger. Every city scarred became a symbol not of weakness, but of endurance. In one of the fiercest battles above the Atlantic, a Council dreadnought unleashed its wrath upon a cluster of human ships, obliterating two instantly. But as the smoke cleared, one remained, a battered vessel named Defiance. Its hull shredded, its systems failing, yet its guns still alive. In a final act of defiance, it rammed the dreadnought's side, its reactor core detonating in a blaze that split the behemoth apart. The explosion lit the skies so brightly that people across continents saw the fire with their own eyes, and they cheered through tears. For though Defiance was gone, its sacrifice became a beacon. Among the Council, the cost was becoming undeniable. Resources stretched thin, rebellion sparked in colonies emboldened by human defiance. Whispers spread among soldiers who began to ask why they fought an enemy who refused to yield. Some even wondered if the humans were touched by something greater than flesh alone, if their will was a weapon more dangerous than any cannon or beamback on Earth. Ambassador Elias Trent stood before a gathering of soldiers, his voice carrying across networks as he told them the truth, that humanity was bloodied, that losses were great, but that the Council had miscalculated. They believed pain would break humans. Yet pain was what shaped them through centuries of hardship. He reminded them that no empire had ever endured forever, but the human spirit had risen again and again from ashes, and now it burned hotter than ever. His words stirred hearts weary from endless battles and renewed their fire. The Council paid for every step they tried to take, and though they wielded fleets capable of burning worlds, they discovered that no amount of fire could erase the will of a people who had sworn never to kneel. As the war dragged on, and the galaxy watched, the myth of Council invincibility began to unravel, and with every passing day, humanity turned their suffering into strength. Forging a legend that would echo in every corner of the stars, humanity strikes back. The Council had grown accustomed to wars where resistance only delayed surrender. But the conflict with Earth had turned into something they had never imagined. Fleets deployed again and again, only to return in fragments, their supplies strained, their pride shattered, and worst of all, their aura of invincibility cracked. Across the galaxy, still they believed that humanity's strength was bound to their homeworld, that if Earth fell, the humans would be broken. But they were wrong, for humanity had no intention of waiting for the next assault. They were preparing to strike back. In hidden bases orbiting moons and in subterranean hangars carved beneath mountains, engineers worked day and night, transforming every scrap of wreckage into weapons. Fragments of destroyed Council cruisers became armor-plating plasma. Conduits once alien were refitted into human cannons. Mines across the planet and in orbital colonies, united in a frenzy of creation. Desperation had burned away hesitation and left behind only innovation. And soon humanity revealed what no other species had dared before. They were building strike ships designed not for defense but for infiltration. The first of these ships, named the Black Spear, launched under cover of the asteroid belt. Its crew, a mix of veterans and volunteers who had nothing left to lose. Their mission was impossible by galactic standards: to infiltrate a Council logistics hub deep in their own territory, destroy its supply lines, and return alive. The Council considered such an attempt madness, but humanity had never played by their rules. The Black Spear moved like a shadow, its hull coated in improvised stealth plating, its crew silent as they drifted among patrol routes and slipped past sentries. No other species would have dared such recklessness. Yet it was recklessness sharpened into strategy. When the strike came, it was swift and brutal. The hub, a massive station meant to feed and repair half a dozen fleets, became a graveyard within hours. Precision strikes detonated fuel lines, drones packed with explosives swarmed corridors, defenders fought. But the humans were relentless and unpredictable. They jammed systems with viruses they had crafted from captured code. They overloaded reactors with sabotage. They turned the enemy's own order into chaos. By the time reinforcements arrived, the hub was burning in silence, the black spear gone like smoke in the dark. The shock was felt across the council like a tremor. Their fleets suddenly strained without supply lines, their carefully balanced logistics thrown into disarray. Worse still, the attack inspired whispers not only among their subjects, but even among their soldiers, who began to question how humans who were supposed to be begging for mercy had dared to walk into the council's heart and strike. The unthinkable now seemed possible, and that possibility gnawed at morale on Earth. The news of the raid spread like wildfire. Families who had buried their dead now raised their heads in pride. Children spoke of the Black Spear as a legend. Soldiers marched with renewed fire, and scientists doubled their efforts. If one ship could do the impossible, perhaps more could follow, and they did. Wave after wave of daring missions launched, targeting communications hubs, supply depots, and shipyards, each strike carrying heavy losses, but each one cutting deeper into the council's flesh. Admiral Korith raged in his chambers, demanding explanations. But no strategy seemed to counter the madness of humans. They ignored rules of engagement. They threw themselves into the jaws of death and somehow turned sacrifice into victory. He watched as reports of uprisings spread across colonies, emboldened by the human defiance. Species once cowed began to whisper of rebellion, and he realized, with growing dread, that this war was no longer about conquering Earth. It was about stopping an idea that spread faster than fire and burned hotter than fleets. Ambassador Elias Trent stood once more before the assembly. His voice carried beyond Earth into channels intercepted across neutral systems. He declared that humanity did not fight to win territory, nor to build empires. They fought because freedom was in their nature, because surrender was a word they could not bear. He told the galaxy that if humanity must fall, they would fall standing, and if they endured, then they would show every world that fear could be broken. His words reached ears far beyond Earth, and in them many found courage they thought long dead. The Council had believed humanity would beg, but now they faced a truth more terrifying than rebellion. They faced a species that had turned survival into a weapon and carried war not with endless fleets, but with unbreakable will. The humans had struck back, and the galaxy would never be the same. The unforgettable lesson. The Council had always seen itself as eternal. Its fleets had conquered empires. Its laws had bound worlds in chains, and its voice had silenced rebellion wherever it appeared. But now, its authority trembled like glass beneath a hammer. Humanity had done what no other had dared. They had resisted. They had bled the Council, and they had struck back in ways that left scars across the stars. Entire supply networks were shattered colonies, whispered of independence, and soldiers muttered questions they never would have voiced before fear of the Council had been replaced with something more dangerous. Doubt Chancellor Vaith summoned the greatest assembly in generations, calling all delegations back to the towering chamber where the Council had first decreed humanity's destruction. The chamber was filled with tension, the envoys restless, the generals brooding, the air heavy with unease. They gathered to decide the final step, to crush the humans once and for all. But as they debated, the chamber doors opened and silence fell. A figure walked forward, unannounced, flanked not by soldiers, but by the weight of his own presence. Ambassador Elias Trent had come to face the Council. Itself gasps filled the chamber. Some delegates rose in shock. Others recoiled as guards aimed weapons, but Vaith raised a claw to halt them. For, though his pride raged, he wanted to hear why a human had walked into the heart of their power. Trent stood. In the center of the chamber, his shoulders squared his face, calm, his eyes burning with something that made even the most battle-hardened alien hesitate. He did not bow. He did not plead. He simply stood and let the silence weigh heavier than the walls themselves. Vaith's voice thundered, demanding to know why the human dared present himself when his species stood at the edge of ruin, demanding to know if humanity had finally come to beg for mercy. Trent waited until the echoes died, and then he spoke his words carried not with arrogance but with truth. He told them that humanity had heard every threat endured, every assault and survived every strike. He told them that Earth still stood, that their fleets, though battered, still fought, and that their people, though scarred, would never break. He said that the council had mistaken silence for weakness when it had always been patience, and now that patience was over. The chamber erupted in shouts, accusations, and disbelief, but Trent's voice rose above them. He reminded them that fleets had fallen to ships they had called primitive, that supply lines had burned from raids they called impossible, that rebellions had spread because humanity's defiance lit fires in the hearts of others. He told them the galaxy was watching, and it had learned a lesson. No council decree could erase that humans would never beg for mercy, that humans were born to endure, and when cornered, they became something no empire could contain. Envoy Chiral of the Thren leaned forward, her feathers trembling as she whispered to her peers that the human was right, that the galaxy had changed already. The words spread like sparks through dry grass, for many had seen the truth with their own eyes. Vaith tried to roar over them, declaring that humanity would be annihilated. But even as he spoke, he saw the doubt in his counselors' faces. He saw fear not of human weapons, but of human will. And he realized too late that the illusion of supremacy had been broken. Trent's final words rang through the chamber as he told them that humanity did not come to kneel, did not come to surrender, but came to remind them of something they had forgotten. He said that empires crumble, armies fade, but will endures, and the human will was unbreakable. He turned without another word and walked out of the chamber, leaving silence heavier than thunder behind him. In the days that followed, the council fractured some worlds, withdrew support, others demanded peace, fleets hesitated, rebellions spread, and though the war was not ended, the tide had turned forever because the galaxy had witnessed a truth written in fire and blood that the council had underestimated. The one species that would rather burn than bow, humanity, had carved its lesson into history, not with mercy but with defiance, and the council would never forget. The humans had not begged, they had risen, and in rising they had changed the stars. The end of arrogance. The stars burned with the wreckage of countless battles, the echoes, a fire still lingering in the silence of space, and yet through all the ruin one truth remained. Humanity had not been erased, they had not fallen to their knees, and they had not begged for mercy. The council that once ruled the galaxy with fear had discovered the cost of underestimation. They had unleashed a storm that would never fade. For every ship destroyed humanity, built another from the ashes. For every city scarred, they raised a stronger fortress. For every life taken, 100 more. Voices rose in defiance. The galaxy had watched a species that should have broken rise instead, and in that rising it saw the shattering of an empire. In the chambers where arrogance once echoed, silence now reigned. The council could no longer speak. With the voice of gods, they were reduced to whispers, haunted by the memory of a human who had stood unarmed and spoken words sharper than any blade. They had believed themselves eternal. But eternity had cracked beneath the weight of willpower that could not be chained. Humanity had taught them that power was not measured in fleets or weapons, but in the fire that lived within those who refused to yield. Ambassador Elias Trent stood again upon the soil of Earth, looking into skies still, scarred with battle yet alive with hope. His people were weary, their wounds deep, their sacrifices beyond counting, but their spirit burned brighter than ever. He knew the war was not over, but the council had already lost something greater than fleets. They had lost the illusion of fear, and once fear is gone, power begins to crumble. The humans had given the galaxy more than defiance. They had given it permission to believe that empires could fall. And so the legend was born, whispered first in secret, then spoken in open halls, that the council had demanded humanity beg for mercy, and humanity had answered not with silence, not with surrender, but with the unbreakable truth that they would never kneel, that even in fire, even in ruin, they would stand and fight until the last breath. The story spread across worlds until even children on distant colonies spoke of it in awe. The story of the species that turned despair into a weapon, and in doing so reminded the galaxy that freedom was worth any price. The council would recover, fleets would be rebuilt, and battles would continue, but nothing could erase what had already been written in history. Humanity had not begged, they had risen, and in their rising they had changed the stars forever. End.